unfortunately for men, because in our society, we've been conditioned to believe that men have three responsibilities, what I call the three Ps: procreate, provide, and protect. Mm-hmm. And men have been doing that for centuries, okay? Unfortunately, what society didn't teach us to do as men is to connect. So what does it mean to connect? Well, in order to have connection, you have to have emotions, because you can't be relational if you're unwilling to be emotional. And so the first thing we have to identify, especially as men, is to be willing to get in touch with how we feel. Because most of us as men, we process relationships from here, not from here. And so again, I went through a divorce, and it was a extremely difficult time, but unlike most people, I took the time to figure out what I did wrong in my first marriage. I took full responsibility for my part in my divorce. And so it took me 15 years after my divorce to find the woman of my dreams, which I have done. But again, I had to be willing to do that inner work first. I had to be willing to unpack my emotional baggage that I didn't even know I was carrying. And so in order to create great relationships, it begins with the relationship we have with ourselves. And so for men especially, how many times have you heard a man talk about self-love and what that means? See, that's a foreign concept for most men. Yeah. But we have to get to that point of self-love, which means we learn to connect with and express authentically how we feel. Because we live in a culture that says, I wrote a book called A New Conversation with Men. And in that book, I identify what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And the first illusion is that to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. And that is what drives most of our negative behavior as men, because we disconnect from our emotions and we process everything from the neck up. If we're going to create great relationships, we got to move to our hearts. And that means we have to get in touch with how we feel. We must understand the impact of early childhood trauma that still we may be carrying around. So it's a process, but let me say from experience that if we're willing to unpack our emotional baggage, and there's a ton of ways to do that, be it therapy, workshops, whatever, unpack our emotional baggage, and then understand what we need in relationships. And a lot of us don't even ask ourselves that question. We just kind of fall into relationships.